Hi guys, this is going to be your second reading video for the week of November the 7th. If you remember that we started our new reading book this week, and we are focusing on many characters, many points of view. So all this week we're going to be looking at different stories with different characters and lots of different points of view. Remember that the point of view tells us who is telling the story or who is narrating the story. The narrator can be a character that's in the story, or it could be a character that's not in the story, someone that is watching the story take place and telling us about the story. In the last story, we talked about how a story can change depending on who is telling the story. If you think about the narrator, if the narrator is telling the story from their point of view, it might be different than someone else who's telling the story because they might see or they might hear different kinds of things. In the last story, we also talked about asking questions, and we said that it is very important before we read, while we're reading, and even after we read to ask ourselves questions. When we ask questions, that helps clarify misunderstandings that we might come across in the story. It also helps us to understand what we're reading and understand things that we see in the pictures or words that we hear in the story. Today, I want us to think about creating mental images. In this story, How the Beetle Got Its Gorgeous Coat, this is a folk tale, and it is from Brazil. Remember that we said a folk tale is a story that is passed down from one generation to the next. Usually it was told by word of mouth, and so the stories are very old. Many times the stories get retold over the years, depending on who tells the story. Most of the time, a folk tale will have animal characters. It will also usually teach a lesson or have something for us to learn from the story. If you notice on page 6 in your reading booklet, this story tells us that we are going to think about details and we're going to create mental images of the characters and the events as we read. So as I read this story to you, I want you to remember what it means to create a mental image. Remember, we said a mental image is something we create in our mind. So today we will be creating mental images to connect to the characters and identify where the events take place. And we'll also be understanding what's happening in the story as we read. So when I create a mental image, I'm picturing something in my mind, and that helps me to understand what's happening in the story a little bit better. As I read, you can take some time in your booklet to jot down some notes over in the side, on both sides. As you create mental images, write down what you're thinking. What pictures pop up in your mind as we're reading? And those things usually help you to understand the story better. Here we go. How the Beetle Got Its Gorgeous Coat, a folk tale from Brazil, retold by Helena del Pino. Today, the beetles of Brazil are admired for their beautifully colored coats. However, there was once a time when they wore plain brown coats. This change took place long ago. A brown beetle was crawling along a wall. Then a large gray rat ran up and laughed. "See how quickly I run," the rat boasted, for he often liked to brag. "You probably envy my speed." "I'm not jealous of you," the beetle replied politely. "I'm glad that you can run so fast." Meanwhile, a brightly colored parrot had overheard their conversation. "I have an idea," she cried. "Let's have a race." The winner will receive a unique and special prize, a brightly colored coat in colors of your choice, she added. Let's stop right there for just a second. As I read over here that the beetle crawls along a wall and comes upon a rat. Since a rat is bigger than a beetle, I can imagine in my mind, I can make a picture in my mind of that rat towering over the beetle. Can underline the words boasted and bragged. And those words are details that help me imagine how the rat is speaking. I can even imagine in my mind how that rat might look if he were boasting and bragging. Next, the author describes the parrot as brightly colored, and the illustration of the parrot shows it with the parrot with red and purple feathers. These details help me create a mental image in my mind of the parrot. So as I read, I can stop and think about what's happening and make a picture in my mind. And that helps me to remember what's happening in the story and understand why the characters are acting the way they act. Another thing that I read in this story was the word unique. When I stop and think about the word unique, I don't know what unique means, but I know the author is describing what a winner will get at the end of a race. As I continue reading about the prize and stuff, I know that it will be special and colorful. When I finish, I realize that the word unique means something different or one of a kind because the beetle's prize for winning the race is his coat changing from brown to a gorgeous color. So as I read on, it helped me to figure out that word unique that I wasn't sure about. You can do that too as you read an unfamiliar word. Let's keep going. The rat and the beetle were excited. Both wanted a colorful coat. Soon the race began. The gray rat ran swiftly as usual. The beetle crawls so slowly, he thought. She can't possibly win. Imagine the rat's surprise when he reached the finish line and found the beetle there. How did you do it? He asked. I flew, she replied quietly and spread her wings. Then the beetle chose a gorgeous green and gold coat, the same coat she proudly wears today. This story kind of reminded me of the tortoise and the hare with the race because you had a slow animal racing a fast animal, and it turned out that the slow animal actually won. In this story, I think the author is trying to teach us something about being boastful and bragging. So, as we think about this story, I want you to remember some things that we talked about. First of all, it's important to create mental images to make a picture in your mind. It's also important for us to think about questions that we might have as we read. We're going to practice this more this week and some activities. I'll see you next time.